Letters to a Friend on Mesmeric Phenomena by a Lady from the New York Spiritual Telegraph, Volume 1, Number 4, Saturday, May 29th, 1852. A gentleman has sent us for publication a series of letters written by a lady to her intimate friend, detailing a course of experiments privately conducted by herself, mainly to satisfy her own mind upon the subjects of mesmerism, clairvoyance, etc. As to the writer, says our friend, the letters themselves are sufficient vouchers of intelligence, culture, and zeal in philosophic investigation, and if I were at liberty to mention her name, family, and social position, it would at once secure for the letters a wide publicity. Number 1. My dear friend, you will be surprised when I tell you that since I last wrote, I have been deeply interested in mesmerism, a power which I once supposed as unreal as the fabled virtue of Aladdin's lamp. I accidentally met with Townshend's Facts in Animal Magnetism, and as I read, I became interested, absorbed, at length convinced, converted to a believer in that which it asserts and describes. And although the author sometimes shows too much caution in his desire not to startle his reader for the bold and fearless pioneer of a new path, and sometimes excites our impatience at his want of faith in us and the power of the truth he is revealing by keeping back a part of his testimony of it, yet it seems to me that no candid mind, however skeptical upon the subject, could read that book and not feel its doubts quickly resolved into earnest questionings, its derision and unbelief into more serious and philosophical investigation. But be this as it may, it was sufficient to awaken in me strong faith, and on closing the book, full of the enthusiasm and interest which it excited, I exclaimed, "I can magnetize." "Ah, well," said Mr. Blank, at whose house I was staying, "if you can magnetize, there is a patient for you," pointing to the sofa where his daughter L was reclining. She had taken cold and was suffering from catarrh and coughing violently. There was a general laugh, in which L joined, but I proceeded, without heeding their incredulity, to the sofa, and in less than 15 minutes succeeded in putting my young friend into the mesmeric state of sleep-waking. The coughing had ceased, the eyelids had that gently drooped yet peculiarly sealed look which they have not when asleep or when closed while awake, and the whole figure was expressive of heavy and profound repose. She readily responded to my lowest tone, but was entirely insensible to whatever was said by others. The family had now gathered around, asking various questions and attempting in vain to arouse her. Her father, who had ever ridiculed mesmerism as the merest delusion, now spoke, commanding her to answer, but she was far beyond the reach of his voice, and to her mother's kind tones and requests she was for the first time deaf. Her father looked amazed and perplexed, but I believe was not convinced till, after my making the reverse passes and awaking her, she assured us she had not the slightest recollection of anything that had passed, and could scarcely credit that she had been asleep, although she had slept 2 hours. One who knew her uniform truth, her perfect ingenuousness and transparency of character as he did, could no longer doubt. On awaking, L found that her cold and catarrh had left her. You are aware that she has been subject to cough for a year past, yet she never coughs while under the influence of mesmerism, and if the pain continues in the chest, it soon passes away on my placing my hand on the part affected. The following evening, while she was in the mesmeric state, the sympathy of sensation with the mesmerizer was fully tested. Her mother handed me an apple without speaking of it. No sooner had I tasted it than L began to eat. On my asking what she was doing, she replied, eating an apple. It was silently changed for a pear. She said she was eating a pear, and afterward a peach was tried with the same success. Indeed, I have subsequently tested this in many instances, and always when we were in such a relative position as that she could not know by the ordinary means. Once, when I was at the distance of a large room from her, I took a piece of flag root from another person, and unconsciously put it in my mouth. I had no thought of trying any experiment at that moment, but L's brother, who was in communication with her, on seeing her lips move, asked what she was eating. She replied, "Flagrant," although not a syllable had passed in regard to it, for my taking it from the hand of another was an inadvertent act. I have frequently mesmerized a tumbler of water and placed it on a waiter with many others, and on my requesting L to drink, she invariably selects that one. Extending her hand to the waiter, she lightly passes it over the top of each till she touches the one mesmerized, when, guided by an unerring instinct, she selects and drinks from that. This have I tried innumerable times, and have never known her to mistake any other for the one magnetized. For mistake it would be, since I find, from having induced her once or twice to drink it, that the taste of water not magnetized is extremely disagreeable. Those around have often suddenly pinched or pricked me or pulled my hair, and L shrinks, placing her hand on the corresponding spot of her own head, and complaining. Yet when the same is inflicted upon herself, she is utterly insensible to it. Once I inconsiderately mesmerized her while suffering myself severe pain in consequence of a sprained ankle. The danger of her sympathizing had not occurred to either of us, but as soon as she slept, her face assumed an expression of intense pain, and the large tears soon trickled from beneath the closed lids. To my anxious inquiries, she answered, "Oh, my ankle, the pain in my ankle is dreadful." I quickly dispersed the influence, and when the eyes opened, her face had regained its natural serenity, and to my question if she felt in pain, she smilingly answered, "No, I never do so soon after being magnetized, you know." She was entirely unconscious of having suffered, or of having imagined she suffered at all. I sometimes mesmerize L early in the evening, and permit her to remain through the night in the mesmeric sleep until a stated hour the next morning, precisely at which she awakes. She will retire to her room, and with my assistance make the necessary preparations for the night, ever with the eyes entirely closed, and yet with the same facility as when awake. I have very frequently impressed upon her mind, while in the mesmeric state, my wish that she should perform a certain thing at a stated hour of the following day when awake, and never has she forgotten or neglected the request. I will give you one or two instances. One evening, when she was asleep, I told L that I wished her to kiss me at 9 o'clock the next day, and at 10 to read to me in Mrs. Shelley's Last Man. She was to remain in the mesmeric state that night till 8 o'clock the next morning. She was breakfasting a few minutes before 9, and I purposely retired to my own room, that my presence should not recall to her mind what was to be done. Precisely at 9 my door opened, and L walked up to the table where I sat writing, and in the most mechanical manner, without its appearing as the prompting of affection, kissed me. Some time after, as I was conversing with herself and sister, and had entirely forgotten the second request, L suddenly took up Mrs. Shelley's work and commenced reading toward the last part of the second volume. "Oh, L," said I, "don't read there. I know nothing of those characters." Still, without noticing my exclamation, she read on. Yet it did not occur to me that she was acting upon the request of the night before, and I again said, "I beg of you not to read in that place. I dislike so much to hear the end of a story first." Yet still she persisted, without making any reply to my entreaties, when a glance from her sister recalled to me the request, and I found the hour to be just 10. Another evening I had told her to read to me at 11 o'clock the next day from some book which we were perusing together. Before 11 we were sitting in the parlor, together with the family, when they requested me to read aloud 2 pieces of Tennyson's poetry that had been sent me by a friend. They were 2 of his most beautiful ballads, so full of simple pathos that none could hear them without being deeply moved. On finishing them, I rose and went into the other room. Hardly had I closed the door, when L came in with a book in her hand, and throwing herself down in a chair, commenced reading in the most rapid, unintelligible manner. "Oh, don't read that now, L," I said. "It jars upon my feelings." But still she hurried on, and instantly I recollected that this must be the hour, as it in fact proved to be. Most mysterious influence that can thus govern the outward act when thought and inclination are all opposed. Her brother told me that when she left the room with the book, her eyes were still filled with tears. She could not have felt in the mood of reading, and when questioned in regard to what had actuated her, I found she had no recollection of the promise of the night before, but only felt, as she expressed it, that this was to be done. And indeed, dear C, I wished to stop when you first asked me, but something seemed to impel me on. In speaking of this with a gentleman who has had much personal experience in private, he suggested to me that the influence was probably not quite dispersed so long as anything remained to be done which the mesmerizer had willed. This idea had been suggested to him by a phenomenon he observed in one of his own experiments. He frequently, in the midst of the sleep-waking, told his patients to wake up for a limited period. They would immediately open their eyes and appear to be awake, and to be unconscious of anything that had passed in the mesmeric state, and he never had questioned that they were awake. But on one occasion, having sent his mesmerized patient into a garden, which was at the distance of a mile from the house to which she was confined by sickness, while she was wandering in the garden and admiring all about her, he said, "Now wake up." She obeyed, and immediately said, "How came I here? I thought I was at my sister's." "And so you are," said he. "No," she replied, "I am in your garden." She had lost the knowledge of being mesmerized, and therefore seemed to be in a third state, alike incognizant of her real position and of the mesmerizer. At the expiration of the number of minutes for which he had bid her wake up, her eyes closed. Again she was in the garden, conscious of having been magnetized. He was so much struck with this that he made many experiments of the kind, and always with the same result. In these partial wakings, this gentleman found his patient could not be brought to see and hear any persons or things of which he was not conscious when in the mesmeric state. He then referred to the case of the two sisters mentioned in Townshend, who were occasionally mesmerized during a winter, and in the intervals left with the eyes opened and committed to their own self-guidance. Their surprise and delight, when the influence was entirely dispersed in the spring at beholding the verdure and blossoms, showed that it had been before but partially so, and generalizing from these facts, he concluded that the patient might not have passed entirely from the influence, in the case where a command is given, to be obeyed the next day. A few evenings since, I persuaded L, while in the mesmeric state, to sit at the table and take tea with the family. It was a singular sight to see her sitting there with closed eyes, unconscious of anything that was addressed to her or said of her, except by myself. Like the dead body at the Egyptian feasts, she seemed to be among us, and yet not of us. The little circle was quite a gay one, and there was much mirth and wit passing around, in which L would have been foremost to partake could it have reached her, but her imperturbable gravity, and the undisguised childlike eagerness with which she partook of the refreshments given her, was quite amusing. The next morning she felt as great an appetite as if she had partaken of no food during all that time, and expressed her surprise that I should have permitted her sleeping so many hours without the refreshment of the usual meal. Townshend mentions the fact that however much the mesmerized eat while in the mesmeric state, they are equally hungry when they wake up, and the dyspeptic can eat without subsequent oppression. He explains it by supposing that the digestive functions are quickened to so great a degree as to immediately assimilate the food with the juices of the body. My own observations upon L are in harmony with this. When L's sister is playing upon the piano in the same room, though in the most loud and distinct manner, no sound reaches her, but when we form a chain by my placing one hand on L while the other is held by another person, who also holds a third by the hand, and so on, until the last placed a hand upon the shoulder of the player, the sound was conveyed to her so that she could name the different pieces that were played, though she said it sounded like music in the distance. She of course never hears anything said by another person until they are, as it is technically called, en rapport, or in communication with her. I have in one or two instances succeeded in stopping this communication by a powerful exertion of the will without speaking. Once when she was describing some place to a lady, she was saying, "The scenery was very beautiful, but there was not enough." Then I willed that she should no longer speak to her, and the word which was to complete the sentence, water, was never uttered, and no question or remark from that lady was again heard by her during the evening. Her powers of clairvoyance, as is usually the case, vary at different times. Sometimes she expresses her inability to go anywhere or to see anything. At another time, she accomplishes all with ease. She has many times seen and described the dress of those who entered the room after she slept. A few evenings since, a little girl came in and, without having spoken, stood at the head of the sofa upon which Elle was lying. I requested her to look at the head of the sofa and tell me if anyone was there. A little girl, she said. Owing to the position in which she laid, she could not possibly have seen her had her eyes been open. Has she anything upon her head? I asked. Yes, something that looks like a piece of cloth, which was an exact description of a peculiar-looking cape bonnet which she had on. It did look like a large piece of cloth flung over the head and descending upon the shoulders. One evening a lady called on her return from a wedding, and finding Elle in the mesmeric sleep, begged me to send her to the wedding party, and ascertain if she could describe the dress of the bride, since, as it was fresh in her own recollection, she could judge of the correctness of its description. Elle expressed her willingness to go, and when, after about 2 minutes' silence, she affirmed that she had arrived at the room, she was asked if she saw the bride. Yes, there she stands, she answered, as if she were really before her, and when asked to describe the dress, she gave so minute and accurate a description as to convince the lady that nothing short of actual vision could enable her to do it. She made but one mistake, which might easily have been made by one there in bodily presence. She said the bride had in her hand a white flower which looked like a very large white rose. It was, in fact, a Camellia japonica. At another time, she was requested to visit Boston. After describing what was afterward substantiated as true in regard to a friend, she spoke of the day as being dark and rainy in Boston, whereas in Providence it was pleasant. This also was found to be correct, but perhaps I am only multiplying wonders which you have not seen and tested as I have, and which therefore strike you as monstrous and improbable. Or you may even come to the conclusion that I am suffering under some hallucination of mind. But, as I am regardless of even your ridicule while examining a subject involving such high psychological truths as mesmerism surely does, you may yet hear from me again. Yours, etc. That was part 1. This is from the next issue, Volume 1, Number 5, from the New York Spiritual Telegraph of Saturday, June 5th, 1852. Here we go. Letters to a Friend on Mesmeric Phenomena by a Lady, Number 2. My dear friend, you express much interest to learn all the astonishing phenomena and the most ulterior results which mesmerism may unfold. I know that you are not so unphilosophical or so prejudiced as to reject any revelations which may throw additional light upon a subject or science, however much they may conflict with your preconceived opinions or overturn your previous theories, but are ever ready unshrinkingly to say, "Truth be thou in place of all to me." Therefore I am most eager to relate to you my last experiments. Last evening, Elle being in a very profound magnetic sleep, it occurred to me to mesmerize some of the organs, and thus make mesmerism a test of phrenology. Without expressing my intention, I first memorized the organ of reverence, but let me here tell you that though I can repeat to you my questions and the answers of Elle, I can by no description convey to you the wonderful transitions in the expression of her face, or the changed and varying tones of her voice. The look, now holy, rapt, beatific, now hard and callous, or supercilious and self-complacent as the different sentiments were called into action. Reverence was mesmerized. Now was the look of holy, satisfied trust. Mesmerizer: do you believe in God? Answer, in a clear and almost joyous tone: oh yes, and in his ever-watchful providence. Ah, I love and adore him, but no words can express these feelings. Mesmerizer: do you suppose that he cares for and governs this little world? Answer, his providence directs all things. Mesmerizer: are there many great and good people here? Answer, oh yes, the world is full of them. The mesmeric influence was dispersed from this organ, and its action reversed. The face assumed a cold, hard, impenetrable expression. The voice became harsh and severe. Mesmerizer: How do you feel now? Answer: I do not feel happy. Mesmerizer: Do you believe there is a God? Answer, in a tone that hard and grating seem not have to express: No. Mesmerizer: Then how was the world made? Answer: All chance. Mesmerizer: How long have you thought this? Answer: Oh, these doubts have just come. My mind is dark and confused. I cannot think clearly. Oh dear, I feel indifferent and yet unhappy. This is a horrid state. Mesmerizer: Do you think there are many wise and good people in the world? Answer: Precious few. Mesmerizer: But you love and venerate the few there are? Answer: I feel no regard for them. This was dispelled, and self-esteem mesmerized. An air of supreme complacency was immediately diffused over the features. The corners of the mouth were slightly drawn down, and the half-smile, expressing the utmost self-satisfaction, was irresistible. And occasionally she would laugh in such a supercilious yet self-gratulatory way that it was perfectly infectious. Mesmerizer: What do you think you could succeed best in doing? Answer: I could succeed in anything I might undertake. Mesmerizer: But what mental accomplishment? Answer: Oh, I could draw finely, or paint, or learn languages with facility. But in composition I should excel. Mesmerizer: Do you think yourself a woman of as much genius as Madame de Stael? Answer, with a little hesitation: Why, no, not as much as she. Mesmerizer: Could you write as well as Miss P., a lady whose writing she had admired? Answer: Oh, I should hope so. I should not use so many quaint expressions, and it would be in a different style, but I think I could quite equal her. Mesmerizer: Do you suppose you have as much talent as any woman in Providence? Answer: You will laugh if I tell you. Mesmerizer: No matter, I wish to hear. Answer: Yes, I think I have. Mesmerizer: You have a pretty good opinion of yourself. Answer, with a chuckling laugh: No better than other people have of me. When the exaltation of this organ was dispersed and the action reversed, her countenance fell, wearing an expression of chastened gravity, and about the mouth one of actual sadness. Mesmerizer: Tell me what you think of yourself, your abilities, etc. Answer, sighing despairingly: Oh, I do not like to think of myself. I do not think I possess talent for anything. Mesmerizer: What do you think you are best fitted for? Answer: Oh, to love people. This was dispersed, and ideality mesmerized. Her face became very bright and animated, and I, supposing the imagination would be raised so as to give an increased power of poetic description, commenced my questions without reference to anything farther. Mesmerizer: Will you describe Miss L's picture of the Madonna? Answer: Oh, how beautiful it is! The expression of the mother's face, so pure, so calm, so seraphic, it seems as if it might make one holy to look upon it in a bad moment. Such a look of perfect trust in those upturned eyes. I could gaze upon it for hours without weariness. Mesmerizer: Will you describe to me some beautiful face you know? Answer: Whose? B's? It is intellectual, and yet so serene, so spiritual. I could not refrain from laughing at her fixing upon this face of a mutual friend. A lady who sat near, not hearing the name, asked me who it was. I turned to answer her, and on turning back to L, found her face had undergone a change. There was such an earnest, intense gaze at something beyond and far upwards, with such an expression of mingled awe, wonder, and admiration, that I said, "L, what are you looking at?" "Oh," she said, in a voice so deep and solemn that it seemed hardly to come from the gentle L, "at that light, that glorious light." Mesmerizer: Does it look like the sun? Answer: No. Mesmerizer: Does it look like fire? Answer: Oh no, far brighter, and yet milder than either. Then, her face becoming actually radiant and glowing, she said, "Oh, what throngs of happy-looking beings!" There was a profound silence, and still she continued this rapturous gaze upward, as though she indeed beheld some beatific vision. "Ask her," said a friend who stood near, "if she sees anyone she knows, if she sees Professor Blank." Mesmerizer: Do you see Professor Blank among them? Answer: Waiting a moment. as though trying to discover him. Oh yes, I see him now. There he is. Mesmerizer. Will you describe him to me? I had never seen him. Answer. As he is now, or as he was? Mesmerizer. As he is now. Answer. He is much more beautiful than when on earth. All that interfered with his beauty when here has passed away, for he never looked entirely happy here, and now he looks perfectly so. Mesmerizer. Does he think of those on earth? Answer. Yes, now he is thinking of Mrs. Blank. Of me, he loves me still. Ah, there is Sister E. How happy she looks. She thinks often of Blank. She looks down on him. Mesmerizer. Do you see any friend of mine there? Answer. You mean Miss T. I was, for a moment, too much dispossessed to speak, for I was indeed thinking of her. L quickly continued, although she had never seen her, and I knew not that she had ever heard of her. Oh yes, how beautiful. She had a beautiful face when on earth, but now it is even more angelic. She thinks much of you. Now she is kneeling down, she bends and is speaking to you. She is alone. Now she has disappeared. I do not see her now. Then, with a sweet, joyous smile, oh, what troops of happy-looking little children. Their faces all so beaming, so glad. Mesmerizer. Have they wings? Answer. No, yet they seem to float through the air. Mesmerizer. Do you see any you know? Answer. Yes, there is little Blank and his little brother. How beautifully they look. Mesmerizer. What are all those little children doing? Answer. Oh, trying to make others happy. Oh, there are more beautiful faces up farther above, nearer that light. Almost in the midst of it. What heavenly music! They seem to be playing on harps, and those, yes, those have wings. They are happier than any of the others. Oh, I feel so happy in this glorious place that I never wish to leave it. But I am not to die so soon as I thought. And strange, you are to go first. Mesmerizer. Am I? How soon? Answer. In a little while. Mesmerizer. In a week? Answer. No. Mesmerizer. In a month? Answer. No. Mesmerizer. In a year? Answer. No. Mesmerizer. Why do you call that soon? Answer. Yes, it does not appear so to you now, but years are as moments there. There is no time there. Mesmerizer. Shall I die within 3 years? Answer. I shall not tell you. Mesmerizer. Why not? Answer. It would not be right. Mesmerizer. I think it right to tell me what you see. Tell me, then, if it will be within 5 years. Answer. No, I shall not. It is not for you to know. Mesmerizer. Do you think you know? Answer. Yes, I know. Mesmerizer. Then you will not die as you have sometimes told me you thought you should. Answer. No, and if I stay at the north this winter I shall not die as I had supposed. Mesmerizer. Will it be long before you go? Answer. No, but a short time, a few years. You will go first. You will be very ill, but for a short time, and then die. Question by a lady put in communication. L, do you see my little Willie? This was one of the children she had before spoken of. Answer. Yes. Question. Does he look as he used to? Answer. Yes, only more happy. He is trying to sing. He remembers you. He is waiting for you. And I see the little twins, and they, too, look very happy. She was afterward questioned about some individuals whom she could not see, and said decidedly they were not there. I then made a few reverse passes. Her face was entirely changed in expression, but still she looked anxiously upward. Why, L, said I, you have come from that place. What are you now gazing at? Answer. Oh, I am looking at that long, dark line of beings that are looking so earnestly toward the light. Mesmerizer. Can't they reach it? Answer. No, but they so long to be there. When asked if she saw any there she knew, she mentioned, among others, those whom she did not find in the light. Mesmerizer. Will they ever get to that bright and beautiful place? Answer. Yes, but oh, it will seem so very, very long to them before they do. The influence was entirely dispersed from this organ, but she was allowed to remain in the mesmeric sleep through the night. After the family had all retired, I conversed with her for several hours. She appeared to be in the most exalted and clear of the mesmeric states. For, as you perhaps know, persons may be thrown into different stages or states of mesmerism. Eliotson, I think, mentions 7. Throughout this evening she spoke in the most oracular manner, never stating a thing hypothetically, but as a solemn affirmation. She seemed endowed with supernatural insight. She told me many truths, much in regard to myself, which was almost startlingly discriminating and accurate. On her reverting to something which a friend said when she was in that happy place, I remarked, "L, you mentioned what was said. Did they appear to speak?" "No," she replied, "but I read their thoughts so clearly that it seemed to me I heard them." I requested her to attempt to write, thinking that as she recollected nothing when awake which transpired in her mesmeric state, if she could see some of her own writing executed during the sleep-waking, it would be a matter of interest and wonder to her. She was then sitting up in bed. I handed her paper and pen and turned involuntarily, saying, "I will hold the lamp." She smiled, saying, "I do not require a light to see by." She then placed the paper on the bedclothes before her, and dipped the pen in the small aperture of the inkstand held in my hand, as adroitly as if her eyes were open. On commencing to write, there was a little filament of hair in the pen, which made a coarse mark. This she herself perceived without my remarking upon it, picked it off, though so imperceptible, and recommenced writing. She wrote a very sweet note to an absent brother, telling him, among other things, of the happiness she had seen that night, etc. This she folded and directed. The writing was better and more even than anyone using their natural organs of vision could have executed upon that irregular surface and in so faint a light. Indeed, you would have deemed it impossible to write at all, for there was but the dim light of a small lamp which was placed at the farther side of a large room. After she had written another note to a friend, I requested her to remain quiet, lest she should be too much fatigued and sleep till 9 o'clock in the morning. This morning, when I first met her sweet unconscious glance, and found her totally ignorant of all that had passed, of all the thrilling scenes of that night, it seemed to me almost impossible that the gentle being before me could be the same with the inspired and prophetic Sibyl of the night before. In this relation there are two circumstances which you will not fail to remark. First, the, to me, entirely unexpected character of her thoughts produced by the increased action of ideality, stating facts and giving descriptions which certainly did not coincide with my previous speculations upon those things, and indeed, which did not with her own belief in her waking hours, thus proving that her thoughts were not taken from the mesmerizer's mind, as is sometimes the case, and secondly, her determinate refusal to comply with an expressed wish, or in fact command of mine, showing what is sometimes questioned, the possibility of an action of the will independent of the magnetizer. I know you will be too much interested in your inquiries and speculations upon a subject which opens so prolific a field for research and contemplation to be wearied by these details, but I must close my long communication. Yours, etc. That concludes Part 2. This is going to be Part 3 from issue number 6, Saturday, June 12th, 1852. Letters to a Friend on Mesmeric Phenomena by a Lady, number 3. My dear friend, you ask if I have already ceased farther inquiry into a subject which appears so replete with interest. Indeed, I have not. I am now even more convinced than when I wrote you some time ago that mesmerism will ultimately be a science which will unfold deeper revelations of man's nature, both physical and mental, than any other. L is now at the south. While in this city, previous to her departure, I mesmerized her with the same success. But when told what she had said at the time Ideality was mesmerized, she was much shocked, and felt it a sort of profanation of sacred subjects which she would never consent to again, and firmly declared she would never be mesmerized unless I would promise not to affect that organ. Therefore, thus much was prohibited. But the other organs exhibited substantially the same manifestations as before. Self-esteem was several times so highly increased as to be irresistibly ludicrous. The ineffable appreciation and admiration of self, speaking in every feature and word, the ingenuity with which she would turn each thought and every word addressed to her, however foreign and remote, so that it should bear some self-reference. And when she laughed, the ceaseless, fearless confidence of that laugh would provoke a smile in the most grave. I paid her a visit one morning, accompanied with Professor B, and though extremely averse to being mesmerized before strangers, in consideration of his acquaintance with the family, she consented. She did many things which surprised and interested him much, but which would be a repetition should I go over them here. Before waking her, I magnetized a 25-cent piece to leave with her until I should see her again, and thinking she might tell me if it was sufficiently so, I said, "Hold out your hand, Elle, and tell me if there is sufficient virtue in this." Just as I extended my hand to drop the piece in hers, the professor, unexpectedly and without uttering a word, intercepted my hand and dropped another 25-cent piece into hers. She immediately shrunk as if she had been struck and dashed the piece to the ground. He had already seen her select the tumbler of magnetized water from a number of others, but wishing to ascertain if this power of discrimination would be the same in regard to metals, he selected 4 25-cent pieces and gave me one to magnetize. They were then placed on the cover of a book and presented to Elle. She took each one up separately, the one I had magnetized being the last, but as soon as she touched, she eagerly seized that, tightly clasping it in her hand, while a smile of satisfaction lighted up her face. Before leaving, Professor B begged me to request her to write something. "Elle," said I am going for a pen, for I wish you to write something for me." She replied in rather a tone of rebuke, "It is not for you that I am to write, it is for Professor B." "I was not attempting to deceive you," I said, "but only to ask if you would do it for my sake." "I knew you were not," she replied, "but it is not right to speak in a way which might mislead." While in the mesmeric state, all mere etiquette, all that is merely conventional, seems necessarily to be laid aside as something supererogatory and useless, and each expression becomes simple and natural. Thus Elle, when excited to tears, whether through emotion or pain, wept with the unrestrained feeling of childhood, and when she ate it was done with the free, simple heartiness of a child. When her opinion was asked concerning persons or things, she told her own thought with the ingenuous truthfulness that admits of no disguise, and sometimes her direct and simple replies, when courtesy would usually veil the truth, would be rather unexpected. For the soul seemed to rise superior to all considerations of time or circumstance, and to view the nature of things in their essence and absoluteness. She now took the pen, and I soon found she was writing a note to her mother. In it she speaks of her being in the mesmeric state, and therefore very happy. When completed, she folded and directed it with the same neatness and precision she would have used in her waking hours. On leaving, the professor declared himself convinced beyond the possibility of a doubt, and to be impressed with the belief that this mysterious power would yet prove the key by which we should unlock many mysteries. But I must now tell you of another interesting young friend whom I have been mesmerizing. When Elle came to this city, preparatory to her departure for the South, she stayed at the house of some friends who were utterly skeptical in regard to mesmerism. Never having heard any convincing proof of its truth, or witnessed any of the surprising phenomena it exhibits, they had not turned their attention to it, but without examination had concluded it to be one of the humbugs and passing wonders of the day. On my first visit there, to Elle, she said to me, "My friends here laugh at all I tell them about mesmerism, and though they, of course, do not doubt my veracity, they certainly think me very credulous, and think the effects produced upon me were only because I was not in very good health, and therefore perhaps nervous and fanciful." To no purpose was it stated that some of the most wonderful results had been produced in the cases of the most robust and healthful, that Townshend's 2 most clairvoyant patients were in good health. We were talking of a power, the very existence of which they denied. In the course of the discussion, a remark was made by a young lady present, their daughter J, which showed such total disbelief in the whole subject that I said, "I have a great mind to mesmerize you, J, to convince you." "Oh," she answered, "you cannot mesmerize me, for in the first place I have no faith in the power, and in the next, if there be such, I am no subject for it." At my request, however, she seated herself. Hardly had her laugh of incredulity and amusement at the oddity of the situation passed by, when I perceived her to be affected, and in less than 5 minutes she was in the magnetic slumber. Her mother was inexpressibly astonished. It seemed impossible for her to realize that J could not answer her, impossible to believe her really in this problematical state. One peculiarity of this case was that I could never entirely subdue J's hearing, owing, I presume, to an unnatural excitement of that sense, in consequence of severe neuralgic pains in the ear, from which she had suffered for several years. Yet in all other respects she was profoundly mesmerized. On my asking if she slept, she replied in a low, distinct voice that she did. Her mother now spoke to her. She did not answer, but her face was very much convulsed, and this was the case when any other addressed her except myself. It was so painful to behold that I inquired of L, whom I had previously mesmerized, and who was in the next room, why it was, and what should be done. She said, "J hears, but cannot answer anyone but yourself. It is useless for her to attempt it, for she cannot speak. Tell her she must not try, since it only convulses her, and you will find she no longer be in such agitation." The advice was followed, and had the desired effect. Afterward, when spoken to, she would remain tranquil or signify by a movement of her head that she heard. I told her what L had said, and asked her if it was as she had explained. "Oh yes," said she, "for I hear them all speak, and try so hard to answer, but cannot. And yet," she added, smiling, "I can always answer you." In all instances which I have seen, when the patient is fully mesmerized, mesmerism has imparted a peculiarly beautiful expression to the face. This is not the case when but partially affected, but in a profound mesmeric state, the face becomes spiritualized, all traces of thought or anxiety have vanished, and the look is one of more serene repose than sleep. It is more entirely so in the case of J than of anyone I have seen. Her face is instantly transfigured. There is a calm, undisturbed innocence, but through this deep tranquility there shines such perfect happiness as we do not often see on earth, and an entire unconsciousness or impersonality of expression, which we seldom or never observe in the normal state. When questioned as regards her feelings while mesmerized, J always expresses that she is perfectly happy, excepting in some instances when I have been unusually depressed myself. Then she has sympathized and appeared sad too, though there was no expression of my feelings. The pain in her ear, which was unremitting in her ordinary state, always ceased as soon as she was mesmerized, and she continued free from it for some moments after she was wakened. For a short time, her parents were extremely averse to her being mesmerized. They could not reconcile themselves to seeing her in this, as they deemed it, unnatural state. But on finding it a relief from suffering, which nothing else could produce, and as her sufferings had been intense for years from this pain, and defied all other means of relief, they consented. J has evinced the same sympathy of sensation as L, although more or less vivid at different times, shrinking and appearing to feel when I am hurt, and always, I believe without exception, telling correctly what I have tasted. This has been frequently tested by handing me lozenges, flavored with different articles, and although I knew not each particular flavor myself until I tasted, she always told immediately what it was. The mesmerized water she never failed to select from as many glasses as might be offered. She is also quite as unwilling that I should move from her, as was L, holding my hand and uneasy if my attention is long diverted from her, whether by reading or conversation with another. I think she is, if possible, more susceptible to the disagreeable sensation produced by the touch of another, shrinking and looking in actual pain, if one not in communication with her touches her, and if accidentally breathed upon by another, she seems to be excessively distressed. This close approach appears to be a counteracting influence, which is extremely disagreeable. Although J hears when she is particularly addressed, or when I direct her attention to any noise or conversation by asking if she observes it, yet the loudest conversation going on in the same room is unheeded by her, unless her attention is thus called to it, and then she says it sounds as though it came from afar. I sometimes request her to open her eyes for a limited time, say from 3 to 5 minutes, and they immediately unclose, though previous to this it would have been impossible. The appearance of the eye is then entirely changed. It is a fixed, unwinking gaze, totally passionless and inexpressive, which takes no cognizance of the object upon which it is riveted. It looks more like that organ in the brute creation, for there is no speculation in it. On the eyes being thus opened, she sees only the mesmerizer. When I have requested her to look at another, it seems impossible, the eyes opening and shutting rapidly. One of the family once entered the room while the eyes were thus opened, and without knowing myself, I requested J to look in that direction and see if she could ascertain who it was. She attempted it, but could only discern a dim form or shadow. The eyes always close when the time has elapsed, without any intimation from me. As iron is drawn by the lodestone, The hand and arm will be attracted by mine into any, even the most painful position. The body always inclines toward the mesmerizer. I have known the head turn entirely round as I walked from before to behind the patient, or from one side of the room to the other. Yet, although the mesmerizer possesses this power over the physical organization of the patient, I am even more strongly convinced by the case of J that there is an independent action of will in the mesmerized. I have once or twice failed in being able to induce her to comply with my wish. In one instance, the request was only to make some slight change in dress which might be beneficial to her health as she was suffering from a cold, but she differed from me in thinking it requisite, and no persuasion of mine, though very pertinaciously urged, could effect it. I will relate one very striking instance of mental communication during mesmeric sleep-waking without the intervention of language. One evening, when J was in this state, Professor Blank, in order to test this power, wrote on a piece of paper, "Say to her mentally, 'J, I must leave you,' and handed the paper to me without speaking. I then thought those words very decidedly, while at the same time I powerfully willed that she should see them. I was at the time holding one of her hands. She immediately put the other arm around me and drew me towards herself. I said, 'Why do you do so, dear?' 'Why,' she replied, 'I thought you were just going to leave me.' This seemed conclusive, and was so to my own mind, and yet I thought some might suppose it a mere coincidence, and say this fear happened to arise in her mind just as the thought crossed mine. I therefore said to Professor Blank, 'This is not sufficient.' A while after he wrote, 'Ask her if she knows where I board.' I knew she could not, as he was on a visit to the city, and she had never seen him but once before, which was in my presence, and surely nothing passed relative to the place of his sojourn. I subsequently ascertained that none of her family were aware where this was. I said, in a careless, incidental manner to J, 'Do you know where Professor Blank boards?' 'No,' she replied, 'I do not. Where does he?' I said, 'J, you can tell. Look into my mind and tell me.' I then made a strong mental effort, repeating the words in my own mind, and most determinately resolving she should see them. She hesitated one moment, as if she were perusing something, and then said distinctly, but very slowly, as if she were reading by a dim light, 'In Washington Street, at the Marlborough.' Precisely the arrangement of words in which the thought was in my own mind. I have never known anything which requires so great a mental effort as this sort of communication. I suppose I might have read or written for hours without so much fatigue as after this. I have sometimes attempted it without success, not being able at the moment to command sufficient power of concentration and will. The organs mesmerized have offered essentially the same manifestations as those in the case of L, varying at different times only in proportion to the degree of power applied to them. Self-esteem, when acted upon, produced the same enviable satisfaction with everything pertaining to self. Probably owing to J's occasionally hearing what was passing around her, and thus there being a link which connected her with her normal state, she would sometimes, when a particular organ was in full action, appear to sink suddenly back into her usual state, and complain that she could no longer see or hear as she had been doing, but almost instantaneously she would regain her newly acquired power, the adverse wind which had blown her back would pass over, and she would again mount on freer wing. I should here also mention that, whether owing to her retaining the sense of hearing I know not, J could recollect, when in the normal state, what had passed in her mesmeric sleep-waking, at first confusedly, or as in a dream, as she expressed it, but the following day more distinctly. Yours, etc. And now we're at the last part of this series, from issue number 7, Saturday, June 19th, 1852. Letters to a Friend on Mesmeric Phenomena by a Lady, number 4. My Dear Friend, continuing my experiments with J, we had new and interesting illustrations of phrenological science, together with some most gratifying results of mesmerism. When Ideality was mesmerized, as I was now prepared for the direction her thoughts would probably take, I refrained from putting any questions until I saw that peculiar expression of intense wonder and admiration, and looks commencing with the skies. I then asked her what she was looking at. Answer: Oh, I am listening to that beautiful music. Do you not hear it? Mesmerizer. No, where does it appear to come from? Answer, from that light. You must see that light, it is so bright. Now I see figures in that light. It is they who make the music. After a moment's silence, when she appeared to listen breathlessly. Oh, how beautiful! Do try to hear it. Mesmerizer, I do not hear it. Answer, it seems as if you must, it is so distinct. Mesmerizer, does it sound like music you have heard before? Answer, no, it is so much sweeter and softer. Oh, how I wish you could hear it. Ah, now it has gone away from me, I cannot hear it. Soon the face brightening again, and the look of delight restored. Mesmerizer, how do those figures look that are in the light? Answer, beautifully, they seem to be floating there. Mesmerizer, how are they dressed? Answer, in white robes. No, it seems like a covering of light, but it looks almost white. Oh dear, something pulls me back, I can no longer see them. When the face resumed its eager expression, I said, see if you can find any that you know. Answer, after a pause, there is someone who looks like Aunt C. Yes, it is she. Mesmerizer, how does she look? Answer, as they did, only very happy. Mesmerizer, does she appear to see you? Answer, yes, she seems to look at me. Oh, I fear I ought not to be here. Mesmerizer, why do you think so? Answer, I thought she began to look sad. Mesmerizer, I think you need not fear. You would not be able to see her if it was not well to. Does she still look sad? Answer, no, now she has gone. I do not see her. After a moment, when the face was even more earnest, it changed. Oh, there! Something pulls me down again. It seems as if it must be an evil spirit. Mesmerizer, why an evil spirit? Do you see any that look so? Answer, no, but just as I get there and feel so happy, something drags me away. When she again appeared to be there, I said, do you see anyone there that I know? Answer, I cannot tell those that you know, but there is one that seems to be looking at you, that seems to be going to speak to you, yes, that is speaking to you now. Mesmerizer, I am so far away that I cannot tell what is said there, dear, but you can tell me. Tell me what you hear. There was the silence of a moment, when the face expressed the most fixed attention. Just then, much to my annoyance, someone knocked at the door, and I felt obliged to disperse the influence, as there was already a lady present beside ourselves, and Jay was unwilling to be mesmerized before a number. At another time, I mesmerized the organ of tune. Soon the lips began to move, and there were slight sounds in the throat. Then the lips would be tightly compressed, and again the mouth thrown open. Jay was then reclining upon the sofa. I said, what are you attempting to do? She answered, oh, I want to sing, but there seems to be a tight cord drawn across my throat, and the sound won't come. I raised her, so that the horizontal position should cause no impediment, when, without my having requested her to sing or made any remark directing her thoughts to music, she burst forth in the most spirited manner, singing The Four-Leaved Shamrock. Then quickly followed another song, and another, the face looking full of animation and pleasure, the fingers moving upon my arm, as if upon the piano, and the feet beating time at the same moment. I can give you no idea of the expression, the graceful freedom, the spontaneity of this singing. Her whole soul seemed to be flowing forth in melody. It was as the bird sings, unconsciously pouring forth its carol, which, for the time being, is its existence, part of itself. Song followed song in quick succession. The voice was fuller, richer than in the usual state. There was too entire unconsciousness for the feeling of restraint or timidity to prevent the full expression. The utter abandon of this singing was charming, and such as we can never hear from the waking state. I would occasionally ask a question at the end of a song. She would just answer it and proceed on to another. Once I said, you love to sing now, Jay. Oh yes, she said, only I can't think of the songs fast enough, though she scarcely paused between them. At another time I said, you feel no restraint now, you could sing before anyone. There were several persons present. Oh no, she said, I am above that now. I should not care if the room were full. On this occasion, the songs she selected were all of rather an animating, lively character, and she actually continued singing while I was dispersing the influence. At another time, when the same organ was acted upon, she sang with much pathos and expression, but all she selected were slow and plaintive airs. She at this time requested to go to the piano, and seating herself before the instrument, she played and sang with such touching expression that one could not listen without tears. From the time I first commenced mesmerizing Jay, the pain in the ear began gradually to lessen. The intervals succeeding mesmerism, when she was free from pain, increased in length. I used to direct the power more particularly to the part affected, following the directions of Deleuze, to breathe frequently upon that part through a folded linen cloth. By holding the ends of the fingers behind the ear, the cords of that side of the neck and also the ear would become benumbed. But that which produced the most beneficial effect was following a direction given by herself during mesmeric sleep-waking, which was to place the hand at the back part of the head so as to bring the ends of the fingers behind one ear and the end of the thumb behind the other. At one time, when we were both confined at home by colds for a week, I frequently sent at night some mesmerized flannel or cotton wool, which laid over the ear on retiring for the night caused cessation of pain and quiet sleep. In 23 mesmerizings, the complaint was entirely cured. Jay would remain mesmerized, sometimes an hour, at others for several hours in succession. Life now wears a different aspect to her. Although she had become so inured to pain as to bear it uncomplainingly and with great fortitude, yet she was habitually silent and depressed. Now she is buoyant and happy, and there seems the light, elastic play of youthful hope and spirit about her. I suppose that one who has never experienced cannot well imagine the wearisome, subduing effect of constant pain such as the neuralgia, but we can easily imagine the reaction, the bounding elasticity which the removal of such must produce. I look upon it as heaven's kindest gift that I have been permitted the power to effect this. I have mesmerized several other persons, but have not time for an elaborate description of these cases. In one instance, when I mesmerized in conjunction with another person, one of us seated on either side of the subject, it was curious to see her oscillate between us two like the pendulum of a clock, until one resigned her to the other, leaving the action to be completed by one alone. I have had one or two cases where the subjects were entirely under my control, in a state of profound sleep-waking, and could not speak to or bear the touch of any person beside myself, and yet heard all that was passing around. And these, too, were cases where there was, apparently, no disease of the organs of hearing. In one instance, my patient said to me, "I hear my husband's voice in the entry. I am sure I can speak to him. I must, or he will never be willing that I should be mesmerized again." Yet, on his immediately entering and addressing her, though her face was perfectly distorted by her convulsive efforts to speak, no word could she utter, but burst into tears at imagining his chagrin. And even when her little infant was handed forward for her to kiss, nothing could the little candidate for her favor elicit but a shudder, until even he was regularly put into communication. Before I close, I wish to relate a most interesting case of Miss Blank, a young woman totally blind, whom I mesmerized in my own parlor the first time she was ever there. She has been entirely deprived of sight for many years. The first few minutes after she was subjected to the mesmeric influence, she was extremely convulsed, and appeared to suffer so much that, from my desire to soothe and bring her into a calmer state, the possibility of her seeing never occurred to me. After about 5 minutes, the convulsions passed off, and were followed by that beautiful serenity of countenance usual in this state, and soon a bright smile lighting up her face. Judge of my emotions of astonishment and awe when she exclaimed, pointing at some flowers which were at the other side of the room, "What beautiful flowers!" "Do you see them?" I asked. "Yes," she rejoined. "How beautiful!" "I think," said I, "that the picture which hangs above them is beautiful." I used the word picture, which, without intending to mislead her, though it unquestionably would, had she not really seen. She immediately said, "The portrait? Yes, it is a beautiful face." Never can I forget the thrilling sensations which almost overwhelmed me on thus restoring sight to the blind. She next observed a very large vase which stood in the farther corner of the room, and said, extending her hand towards it, "Why, I never saw so large a vase." One of the ladies, there were 3 present beside my patient and myself, then brought the bust of Blank, a young girl whom Miss Blank had occasionally seen during her sleep-waking, and placed it near the vase. No remark was made, no word was spoken of it, for I had immediately put my finger to my lip to intimate that perfect silence was to be preserved. Nearly a minute elapsed, and I began to think she would not observe it. Presently, an expression of such surprise and delight came over her face that I said, "What do you see that pleases you?" "Oh, you know? It is blank," she exclaimed, clasping her hands together with uncontrollable emotion. "Let me kiss it." I handed it to her. Then, indeed, it was evident that she could perceive very distinctly. Otherwise, she might have kissed the eye, the chin, or any other spot, but she raised it instantly to her lips, and pressed the small mouth to her own as one only could do who beheld it. Afterward, she pointed to where Miss Blank sat, a lady who had often visited and read to her, asking, "Who is that?" "It is your friend, Miss Blank," I said. "Do you see her?" "Yes," said she. "I see all three of the ladies, and I want to speak to them all." As they came forward and were successively put into communication with her, she held each for an instant at a short distance, evidently surveying them with great satisfaction and pleasure. But at length came the time to awaken her, and scarcely could I command sufficient resolution to effect it when, on making a few reverse passes, and she felt her sight gradually diminishing, she exclaimed in tones which were heart-rending, "Oh, I would not prevent you from seeing! I would not prevent you from seeing!" and burst into tears. When she was fully awakened, her face resumed its usual expression, and we saw that she was unconscious of all that had taken place. When we related it to her, she was deeply disappointed that I did not will her to remember it all on awakening, "For then," said she, "I should remember how you all look," and she could not possibly refrain from repeatedly bewailing my want of consideration. It appears to me that this case would have convinced the most inveterate skeptic or derider of the power of clairvoyance, for it could not in this case be averred, as it has been in other instances, that she saw with the usual organs of vision, the power of which had been so increased as to render the closed lids a mere transparent covering, since she has no eyes, they having actually run out. She could not have known anything of the furniture of my room, but even supposing she did, she could not have known how each article was situated, or have been prepared for the introduction of an article which did not belong there. And indeed, as there had not been the slightest intention of my mesmerizing her before she came, and my resolve to do it being purely incidental, arising out of circumstances of the moment, there could be no reason for preparation. In fact, there was evidence throughout which no candid mind would attempt to gainsay. If the soul, without the instruments it ordinarily uses for that purpose, can see 1 inch, why should we limit its power of perception to any mere distance? I must confess that now I am positively and beyond the shadow of a doubt convinced that a person who has no eyes can, in the mesmeric state, see, perceive, or apprehend objects. Language has no term which exactly defines the thought. I must of necessity accede to the preposition that they can apprehend what is going on in London from Boston or Rome, or in the planets from Earth. In fine, that they possess power of discernment far beyond the scope of our duller physical senses. Yours, etc. And that's all she wrote. That's the end of the series. Interesting stuff.